I'm first of all going to do an introduction to the background of the project, and then I'll hand over to Nick. So, Nick, do you want to start with the intro?
Yeah, I'll share the...
Nick's got the some presentation information, and we'll run through that. And we're going to be here for maybe an hour and a half at the most, probably about 3/4 of an hour doing this introduction, and then have an open discussion, questions, feedback for the second half of the session. So I'm just
let me know when you want to move the slide forward.
Yeah. So thanks, Nick, and yeah, if you can move forward, that'd be great. So the Connecting the Culm originates in a partnership project, bringing together many different partners from across this area of Europe. It's funded through the 2Cs Interreg program, and Interreg focuses on sharing learning across borders and testing out new approaches to common problems. And this particular program we're involved in is all about responding to the impacts of climate change. And so we've got a cluster of 3 partners in the Southwest, the National Trust up at Porlock in Somerset, the Somerset County Council and Somerset Wildlife Trust on the Somerset levels, and ourselves on the Culm. And then there are other partners scattered across northern France, Belgium, Flanders, and the Netherlands. And they're all involved in water management in response to climate change impacts, which is a big area of concern, obviously. So the Interreg funding is funding about 60% of the costs of the project. And if you can move to the next slide, please, Nick, we'll talk about the overall aims. So the co-adapt is all about co-creation. So that's one of the key arms of the project, is that it involves people in solving problems together, solving the problems that affect them. And so rather than technocrats issuing and deciding on future plans, it brings the professionals and the agencies together with people who live in the catchment and who are affected by the issues to work together on solutions that are effective. And it's using nature-based solutions. That's a key element of it, because it's been found that just pouring a load of concrete isn't always the best way to deal with many of the issues that flow from climate change, and that working with nature is essential. And it's all about adapting to climate change. We know that a lot of climate impacts are locked in. They're going to happen. We're seeing the impacts already, and they are likely to get worse. So we've got to cope with those impacts as best we can. And so it's the intersection of those 3 areas that this project exists. So that's some quite technical language, but we'll be going on to unpack that through the course of this talk and clarify a lot of the different strands of that work. Okay, Nick, next slide, please. So this is the Culm catchment in all her glory. A very varied catchment, from the rising up in the top of the Blackdown Hills over in the border in Somerset, and then working down through the AONB into the broader floodplain around Culmpton, and then joining the Exe down at Stoke Cannon. So it's very varied landscape, very interesting, with a lot of stuff going on there. Major urban developments, major transport corridors, rural isolated settlements, lots of interesting issues. And in its 260 square kilometers, sorry, which is quite a substantial area with all the tributaries that flow into it. So it's a very interesting project to work on with in this sort of compact but varied landscape. So the project sponsors and key partners are there on the screen. Blackdown Hills AOMB is the lead agency, and it's providing the hosting the project. Devon County Council is a part funder, as is the Environment Agency, Mid Devon District Council, and the National Trust. National Trust are a big landowner, obviously further down on the Culm. West Country Rivers Trust is one of the main contractors working on delivering the project alongside the Blackdown Hills, and Devon Wildlife Trust are also involved on doing biological recording and aspects like that. So that's the project team, and as I say, it's a 3-year project. We have been delayed in getting this launch underway, so we're 1 year in. We've got another 2 years to go. So by late 2022, actually, we're going to be aiming to complete this phase of the project. So next slide, Nick, and I think it's handing over to you. We're going to be sharing the whole program with you now.
Yep. Okay. So thanks, Dominic. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. I'll quickly introduce myself and then crack on with the presentation. So my name's Nick Paling. I work for West Country Rivers Trust, and I lead a section of the Trust's work, which we call evidence and engagement. But so we do a lot of the data and evidence work, looking at rivers and the water environment across the West Country. But also we lead on the community engagement, the collaborative working in partnership kind of side of things. And the Trust has partnership working at the core of its charitable objectives. So Connecting the Culm is a perfect project for us to be involved in, or we would say so, because climate change, adaptation, resilience, a river, an iconic river, and working and the challenge of reconnecting not just the watery bits of the environment together, but reconnecting people with the water environment as well. So very pleased to be involved in the project, and it's very exciting to see all of the different strands of the project now fully up and running and starting to deliver. So this is a graphic. This is the homepage of the new Connecting the Culm website. And to plug it, visit the website connectingtheculm.com, and you'll find huge amounts of information on there about the project, and also about how you can get involved, how you can connect with the River Culm, how you can be involved in working with nature, or indeed working to co-design the blueprint for the river that Dominic's going to talk about a bit later. So I put this in here just to plug the website, but also to structure the talk. So we're going to basically work through the 4 main sections of the project, starting with Discover the Culm. So I'll move on from there. So obviously at the core of this project idea is about connection, reconnection, and obviously that's not just about connection of hydrological connection of the river and with its landscape and soil and all of the technical aspects of the project, but really there's a real need these days to reconnect people with nature, and obviously the river is a wonderful, our rivers are a wonderful part of our cultural and natural heritage, and so we really want to use the project as an opportunity to inspire people to discover or rediscover, or to deepen their level of connection with their local river, in this case the River Culm, obviously. So the graphic here is one that we've commissioned as part of the project. A local artist was commissioned to develop this painting, this illustration that shows the diversity of the Culm landscape, and starts to pick out some of the really wonderful and rich array of cultural and natural assets that the landscape has. And so it's kind of a postcard from the River Culm. But if you actually search for the River Culm on the internet, not much information comes up. There's a woman who's a photographer called Alison Day, I believe, and she has created a wonderful gallery online of photographs of the River Culm. and that's been really useful for us because she said that we could use her photographs. There's also a man with a drone who flies his drone across sections of the River Culm and creates some wonderful videos, which are really nice to look at of the River Culm. But beyond that, there's not a huge amount of information out there in particular in relation to the river. So we've seen set the project up to try and plug some of those gaps and really provide a raft of resources and information that can help people connect with the River Culm. So just some graphics here just to remind me really about all the different elements and aspects of the River Culm and this wonderful landscape that we're looking at. You know, it's a wonderfully ecologically rich landscape, iconic in terms of the way it looks. The Blackdown Hills are a wonderful example of a rolling green Devon landscape. Lots of wildlife, both in the river, near the river, and in the wider landscape. Huge historic and heritage interest in the landscape, both industrial history and heritage, but also art, creative arts, and a huge amount of historical information, obviously, in relation to the landscape as well. And I had a conversation with Dominic briefly this morning. I put a salmon on the slide, and so I have had conversations with members of the West Country Rivers Trust team about salmon, and salmon do make their way into the bottom of the Culm, but I suspect they struggle to make their way too far up it. So again, you know, iconic species that would historically have used this river. You know, that we're interested in all of these aspects. So yeah, just a bit of a buffet there in terms of graphics and images relating to the Culm. So the other way that we're trying to really get to know the River Culm and connect with it is obviously there's the positive stuff. There's the celebrating the wonderful things that are there, whether it's history or natural history or environmental beauty or whatever. But also there's another side to that coin, which is that there are a number of challenges which are emerging in relation to this river, as with all of our rivers. And perhaps the one we focus on the most on the Culm, or we have focused on so far, is in relation to large volumes of water causing flooding. But also we're very interested in such things as drought, and obviously with climate change impacts escalating, we're likely to see the impacts of low rainfall even more in the future. We're also very interested in the ecological health of the river particularly, but also the wider landscape. And so we're doing a huge amount of work looking at data and information and scientific evidence that helps us try and get to know this river better and to understand the challenges we face if we are trying to make it more resilient in the future. Ultimately, a river that's healthy provides us all with wonderful array of benefits. The water environment can protect us from challenges such as flooding and drought. But as the health of the river and the water environment degrades, then obviously its resilience goes down, and likewise it can switch over from giving us benefits and protecting us to causing problems for us. So we're very interested. There's a big part of the project is focusing in on the science of these challenges. So the next section of the website and of the project is about trying to inspire and empower and enable all people in the catchment who are stakeholders. We use the word stakeholders in a very casual way these days to talk about anybody, but actually we're really interested in true local stakeholders, like people who have a stake in this river and its future resilience. And the way we want to try and connect people with the river is through getting them involved genuinely and encouraging them to participate in the project and the processes that we're going through. So there is a wide array of mechanisms by which you can get involved in this project, from the very simple things like filling in our online survey about the river, signing up for a newsletter. You can attend an event like this one, and we're going to have a whole program of events over the next 18 months probably, focusing on all sorts of different aspects of the River Culm and the project and the various things we're trying to do. There's a big strand in the project about history and heritage. A heritage organisation, a specialist organisation called Fjorda, have done a historic landscape review of the river, of the whole Culm Valley and the whole Culm landscape, and we're putting that together into some really interesting stories and online events to showcase some of the amazing heritage and historical aspects of this landscape in the Culm. Obviously, some people like to get involved and connect with the water environment, with the river, through wildlife and natural history, and with Devon Wildlife Trust in the project team and ourselves. Then there's a huge opportunity to do that. There's been a lot of work over the years by the Blackdown Hills OMB and others on such things as crayfish and fish, and also there's rumour of talk about beavers and other key wildlife species. So there's a real opportunity there to be part of that conversation. You can also, they were offering the opportunity for people to become citizen scientists, river scientists. We have West Country Rivers Trust have a citizen science program called West Country CSI, Citizen Science Investigations, and we've started our process of recruiting a brigade of citizen scientists from across the Culm landscape. So that's, if science floats your boat, then that might be something to get involved in. Other people prefer to take practical action. So getting their hands dirty, whether that's picking up litter or volunteering and taking practical action to restore the river or manage habitats or whatever that might be. And we're going to try and create as many opportunities as we can for people to get stuck in and work with us to really try and make a difference in terms of working with nature and delivering what we would call nature-based solutions, but what normal people would call nature. And the other key thing is that, and Dominic's going to talk about this a bit more a bit later on in the talk, we're developing a blueprint for the Culm, which is a shared future vision and plan for how we might get this river back into rude health and delivering all those benefits that I mentioned before. And so there is an open invitation to anybody, literally, and we mean anybody from who has an interest or is a stakeholder in the Culm, to participate in that process of designing and delivering the blueprint for the Culm. So very quickly, I mentioned citizen science. So we've already had one citizen science training event a couple of weeks ago on the Culm, and we're going to be running a whole series of these training events to try and build up a group of citizen scientists who are monitoring and assessing the water quality and other aspects of the River Culm. And as you can be a citizen scientist in a variety of ways. You can be given equipment to take water samples, as Rosie, my colleague, is doing in this picture, or you can just take photographs of the same part of the river on a regular basis and submit those, or you can be undertake surveillance. So if you see things that you don't think are good, or that you might be an issue, you can post those. We've got other things, river fly, wildlife spotting, and various other ways that you can express your newfound citizen science feelings, motivations. So if you're interested in that, then you can find out more about it on the website or on the West Country Rivers Trust website, or you can get in touch with us and we'll point you in the direction of the citizen science team. And just to say, I know it's late notice, but actually there's a CSI webinar tomorrow. Ian Townsend, formerly of South West Water and now of West Country Rivers Trust, is giving a presentation tomorrow, actually 11 AM till 12 till midday. And there is more information, I believe, on various websites and things. So we'll circulate after today's meeting more information about that. I know it's last minute, but yeah. So that's a blatant plug for that at this stage. So the last thing that for me to talk about before I hand back to Dominic is this issue of question of working with nature. We use the expression working with natural processes, working with nature, nature-based solutions, natural flood management, and I can go on and on and on, all these different terms, but they all kind of mean the same thing, which is about this idea of working with nature, using nature to in the restoration of natural processes to try and make both the environment and ourselves more resilient to some of the challenges that we're going to face in the future. And the toolbox of nature-based solutions, as we would call them, the ways that you can work with nature are hugely diverse, from planting trees, as you can see here, through introduction of species like beavers, but also more work to improve soil. There's a whole raft of things that we can do, and it's a major part of Connecting the Culm to identify opportunities to work with landowners, land managers, community groups, and in any way we can to try and work with nature to deliver a resilient future for this landscape. And working with nature doesn't mean that you have to exclude what we might disparagingly think of as grey solutions. It's more about a blended approach where you combine more traditional engineered solutions, which sometimes are really necessary, but using nature and nature-based solutions to make those assets more resilient, to try and come up with a more integrated way of doing things, because one thing in isolation is very unlikely to give us that resilient future that we all so desperately want and need. So we've got some graphics. These aren't graphics from Connecting the Culm, but Connecting the Culm is actually working to produce some graphics of this nature. But this is a graphic that we call Good Farm, Bad Farm. Again, it's just to try and bring to life this idea of what we're trying to achieve in a project like this. This is obviously shows two extremes of a continuum. There aren't too many farms which are as bad farm. There aren't too many farms which are as good farm. Most of our farmed environment is somewhere in between. But the challenge we face is to try and shift as much of our landscape as possible from the left to the right of this graphic. And that we have this idea that the farm depiction on the right of this graphic is more resilient, it's more sustainable, it has more biodiversity and wildlife in it. The water that runs off it does so in a cleaner and more regulated way. And so again, we're only at the start of the process, but we're trying to work out what that looks and feels like in the Culm. And as I say, in the project, we're developing some Culm specific graphics, which will hopefully allow us to bring to life this idea of what a transition from perhaps the old way of managing our environment to a new way of managing it might look like. Just so we don't forget, we also have another graphic, which is called Good Town, Bad Town, funnily enough. And again, this is just to try and show people how in an urban landscape, you can use nature-based solutions. We can work with nature to achieve similar kinds of outcomes. When I got this commissioned, this picture, my wife saw a preliminary sketch and she said, "Oh, that's obvious." She said, "It's obvious. You don't need that. Why is it? It's really obvious that the top bit is good and the bottom bit is bad." And I said, "Well, if it's so obvious, why do so many of us live in the bottom part of this picture?" And it's fair to say that a lot of our urban landscapes are a little bit lacking in terms of the way that they manage water and they provide spaces for wildlife and so on and so forth. So obviously the Culm is a largely rural landscape, but we do have Clumpton, we do have a plan for some development in the catchment. And so again, we're looking at some of these ideas for Connecting the Culm. I won't go on much longer, but this slide is to remind me of a critical factor in terms of nature-based solutions, perhaps the most important natural asset that we have, particularly in a landscape like the Culm, and that's soil. And there is a huge focus, obviously, on soil and its health. The health of our soils is a key regulator of water flow. Soil protects us from flooding, it protects us from drought, it provides huge amounts of biodiversity. It sequesters, when it's healthy, huge amounts of carbon. And when it's unhealthy, it loses that carbon into the atmosphere. And so a lot of the nature-based solutions, working with nature, activities that we deliver are still focused on the health of our and function of our soils, and even planting trees in many situations. Yes, obviously trees have huge value in their own right, but one of the other benefits of planting trees is that they have a huge positive benefit to soil condition and function. So if you take nothing else from this presentation, then remember this slide, because it's absolutely critical. This is just a very quick depiction of the catchment, just to show that in the project we have these 3 priority areas or target areas that we're looking at. One at the top, which is a very unique landscape in the headwaters up towards Somerset. And we've got a focus area there on the headwater and the small streams in the headwaters of the Culm. There's obviously another big focus to right down at the bottom around Killerton, where just above the confluence with the Exe. Very, very different landscape, different challenges, different types of actions that we can take down there to build resilience in the landscape. And then slap bang in the middle, obviously, you've got the Culmpton Culm Garden Village area and the Culm Valley to the north and east of that. And so there's a big focus there as well. And I should say that just because we've got these priority areas doesn't mean that we're not in the project looking at the wider landscape. We're looking at anywhere in the Culm where there's an opportunity to do something valuable and useful, and do that in collaboration with local people. We will look to do.
It's worth adding to that, Nick, that the purpose of these demonstration zones is for us to do some direct interventions. We have some of the funding from the Interreg project is to actually build some nature-based solutions in the landscape. And the reason we've selected these as our demonstration zones is we know we've got they're going to give us good case studies of, for example, floodplain reconnection. And the National Trust down at Killerton are very keen on doing some of that on the near the back of the estate where the Culm passes through on a lovely floodplain. Yeah. And by spending that money and making that investment, we can then show people what it looks like when you do a bit of nature-based solution, and we can use that as a demonstration to inspire people.
Yeah, and I always use the good farm, bad farm graphic to try and bring it to life for people, and it's quite a useful graphic to be able to say, you know, this is kind of what it's like, and this is kind of where we want to end up. But there's nothing as powerful as actually showing it happening in real life. And so being able to take people or show people outside, we can actually do this. We can actually create that future landscape that we want. Should be really powerful. So that's probably one of the most valuable aspects of the project, is being able to demonstrate that we can actually do this. We can talk about it, we can plan it, we understand what it needs to look like, but then we can also deliver it. We can make it a reality. So that's my bit. And then to finish off, Dominic's going to describe to you the blueprint for the Culm. So I'll hand back to Dominic.
Thanks a lot, Nick. That was great. Yeah, if you could move on to the next slide. The blueprint is kind of the biggest outcome or output of the whole project. It's what we are most focused on. And, you know, all of the engagement with communities, bringing people together to work on the future of the river, all takes shape through the blueprint. Can you go on to the next slide? Thank you. And as we've discussed, what the aim of that plan is to make sure that the river is resilient in the long term to the effects of climate change and is wonderful for people and for nature. And this plan will be a 25-year at least, perhaps even a 50-year plan. And it will be a practical management plan for the catchment, for the whole catchment, all of the rivers that drain in and tributaries that drain into the River Culm, all of the streams. And it will be shaped by the people who live in the catchment. That's our ambition. And because it's so embedded in the community and it comes from the people who live in the community, we expect it to be very impactful and to have a lot of leverage with funding and investment organizations and with policymakers. And we've already got significant buy-in through our funders. Well, they're expressing it through the funding they're putting in to the project, but they're also committed to this long-term policy solution. Excuse me. So the Environment Agency, for example, are significant funders of the project, and they see this as a very interesting pilot program and pilot approach to shaping the long-term investment program in a coal catchment and taking that integrated solution. Devon County Council also very interested in this approach to tackling flood risk and how we can use this really embedded way of working to generate change in the long term. And same with Mid Devon District Council, and with their obviously there are significant investment programs being planned with the Culm Garden Village and elsewhere, and making sure that those investments are done wisely so that we're not creating problems that are going to kind of bite back at us in the future. We're doing them wisely, sensibly, building them in the right way, so that we, with full awareness of what's coming down the line. So that's the sort of principle of the blueprint. And could you go to the next slide, which is really about co-creation? You know, the fact that we're going to do this, it will likely be messy. It will likely be hard work, because getting people together to find agreement on such a complex area of interest with so many overlapping and competing land uses and the complexities of future climate change and what that looks like, it's you know, it is a complex, tangled web. But we have got a good team supporting the project. We've got lots of resources at our disposal to help make it work. We've got some great science underpinning everything. And we've got some great communications tools that we can use to bring in as wide a range of people around the table as possible. Can you go on to the next slide? So the blueprint will consist of sort of these key elements, really. The evidence review has already been carried out by West Country Rivers Trust, and we commissioned that early in the project, and you can access that through the library on the website. You can download the whole report, and that's got some really great mapping and evidence that shows you how the catchment is functioning today. And then we're going to be doing some scenario mapping, and we've got another useful piece of work, which is a computer-based model that means we can map different levels of rainfall and show how that impacts on the landscape. And we can also model different interventions. So for example, if we plant trees alongside the river and all its streams throughout the catchment, how much difference does that make to peak flood events, or how much difference does it make to drought impacts in 25, 50 or 100 years time? So that kind of scenario mapping is going to be a crucial part of, as we build up our picture of how do we want this catchment to be. We're also doing policy landscape mapping. So we're working with all of those statutory agencies, from local government through to national agencies like Highways England, Network Rail, on their investment plans, their long-term policies and investment programs, so that we can align them in the best way possible and make them really efficient for how they invest in the catchment in the future. And, you know, we want to influence national government as well, so that land funding for farmers and land managers and landowners can be directed in the best possible way, because there's a lot of money being spent on in the catchment, no doubt about it, and getting that channeled in the best possible way is what we need. And the co-design process then will be this, probably over the next 18 months to 2 years, will be this process of bringing together professionals, whether that's scientists or government agencies or whatever, or local government, together with civil society, with residents, community groups, all range of people that are living and active in the catchment, bringing them together to actually author this blueprint. Next slide, please. This is just a sort of graphic to show the whole range of different agencies and organizations that could be involved and will likely be involved and want to be involved, and that we want to recruit into the process. A whole range from local government agencies and different levels of local government, academia and education sector, statutory bodies, environmental groups, local businesses, local community groups, local special interest groups. And this all of this activity has been stimulated really through the East Devon Catchment Partnership, which is right back at the roots of when we started working on this project. And they hold together a whole basket of activity across the East Devon area and Mid Devon for all the rivers that flow into the Exe and the East Devon area. So that's a complex area of work, and we've got a sort of, the next slide please, Nick, shows our timetable. So at the moment, July, August, September, we're in this engagement phase, and we're bringing as many people as we can into the room to engage with the process. And we're going to hold a forum event in early November, which will be a big gathering, probably going to still have to be online, sadly. But as soon as we can do it physically, we will. And that forum event will be the launch of the blueprint process. And from that point onwards, we'll be doing blueprint development. And although I've got to say the engagement will continue throughout. So we're looking forward to being able to do lots of walks and activities and events once conditions allow. And meanwhile, we'll do as much as we can online. Also, during these coming months, we'll be doing our policy landscape mapping, working with the decision makers and the funders, and we'll be developing our scenarios of future climate impacts. So that come the forum in November, we will have quite a lot to talk about, quite a lot of material on the table that people can start to shape and piece together and decide on priorities and work out, you know, what is going to happen, what's likely to happen, and how can we best respond. And underpinning all of this, we have a team of people in West Country Rivers Trust who are working with landowners to look at these demonstration nature-based solutions, planning the locations and doing the installations. That will be happening right through the next 2 years, and as a real practical demonstration of what we're doing. So that, I think, concludes my section on the blueprint, and it's over to you for feedback, questions, and discussion. Does anybody want to, I mean, have there been any questions come up on the chat that are worth addressing, or does anybody want to dive in with a first, any feedback or comments?
Jennifer, and I just wanted to say, I really apologise. I'm so late to your meeting. I put the ending time down in my diary, so I was aiming for 11:30. So apologies.
Oh, what a shame. Well, we've been recording it, Jennifer, so we will share that recording with everybody, and you can catch up with it later.
Oh, thank you. Great. And actually, a friend has just emailed me to say that she couldn't get in. And I think that she didn't realise she had to register with Eventbrite. So I will tell her that about the recording.
Thank you. We'll post it on the website as well, so it'll be easily accessible. Paul, you've unmuted. Do you have a question? Yes.
I have, and apologies because I have to go in 5 minutes. I think the big thing, so first of all, found that incredibly helpful and really clear and succinct, so thank you everyone involved. And secondly, from my point of view, is I think at a really early stage it's involving the landowners and land managers in this, and I know you have with some already. I just think that's absolutely key to the success of any project that is going to involve land management. So it's just a real positive plea, and anything that we can do as a local community to make sure that land managers and land owners feel that they're absolutely embedded in this from the start.
Yeah. They absolutely, I mean, they absolutely are. They're right at the heart of the working with nature, working with natural processes concept. They're right at the heart of the Connecting the Culm Project idea, and they're right at the heart of what we do as in terms of West Country Rivers Trust. Working with, I mean, I can just couldn't agree with you more. The challenge we've had, obviously, this year has been the fact that we haven't been able to go out and do the sort of the catchment, being in the catchment, being in the landscape, connecting with particularly the farming community because of coronavirus. So, and Daniel, who's our farm advisor for Connecting the Culm, has actually been furloughed for quite some time. He's back now, and so we're really ramping up now in terms of, as soon as there is still some nervousness out there amongst the farming community, so we're just having to take it softly in terms of the way that we connect with them, because we can't use normally we do cold calling, and so it's just not part of the process at the moment. So Daniel is back from furlough now, and so we are ramping up, but obviously we completely agree with your point.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank you. Thanks, Paul. We have Chris Hill is in the corner there.
Dan, actually, his wife.
Hi.
There was a move a few years ago by a group to try and get a cycle track going along where the old railway was. I'm from Acland, and I know there was great resistance from the farmers who had actually got the land off the railway people at the time to doing that. So I agree with you, it's got to be very softly with changes with farmers. There was one other thing that I seem to remember from a Guardian article a year or two ago, that this was done, this sort of planning about river catchment areas in other areas of the country where there's been flooding with huge success. Am I right that this has been done elsewhere?
Absolutely. So there's a couple of things to say that on the cycle path. So I think historically, ideas like long distance cycle paths, particularly, or footpaths in the rural landscape, particularly in the West Country, have been quite controversial. Lots of people want or need access to the environment, and there's lots of competing interests, and often these discussions, these ideas end up mired in controversy and disagreement. And so the way to try and we would try and get around that, and obviously the way Connecting the Culm would try and get around that, is by about having a conversation with people, an open and inclusive and honest conversation about the future and what people, and so that everyone understands what other people want and need from the landscape in which they live and work and etc. and farm and whatever. The world has changed. It is changing very rapidly, and I think that we're starting to see in other parts of the West Country some of these ideas about access to the environment, access to the countryside, coming back. So we do have to deal with that carefully, and we do need to have all the conversations with everyone in the room, everyone who has a stake, if you like. But I think that we might start to see some of these projects gaining some more traction in the future, just because of the way the world has changed, and particularly in terms of the farming community. There is the farming community appear to be much more receptive now to ideas about diversification or changing the way that they give access to the countryside, and so there is a real opportunity now to have those conversations. I'm not saying that it's going to happen, because it's a long journey, but I think as long as you've got a broker, someone who's willing to bring people together and facilitate the conversation, then I think we have as good a chance now as any to try and get some of these ideas moving forward. In terms of the bigger conversation, a sort of a collaborative, participatory approach to flood risk management planning, So we have catchment partnerships across the whole of England and Wales, or large parts of Wales. And the catchment partnerships have been very successful over 10 years of playing this role, of bringing people together and coming up with a sort of a shared vision for a river landscape. In particular, in relation to flooding, there's been huge success in terms of having a much more inclusive conversation with people more generally in Cumbria because of what happened there in recent history. And there's also in Somerset as well, there's been some really amazing work done bringing people together to talk about flooding and planning the future, and in a great many other places, particularly often in cities and urban landscapes, because you have such a large population available. Urban flooding is a major issue, many more properties at risk, you know. So there has been a lot of success in cities and urban landscapes and in towns. In completely rural landscapes, it's much harder because the community is so much more diffuse. And so, and that's what the challenge we have with Connecting the Culm, which is that the population of the Culm landscape is not that big, and people are in their communities, and they tend to be quite diffuse across the landscape. So it makes it more of a challenge, but I think it makes it all the more impactful and beneficial if you can do it, if you can genuinely get people in a room and make them feel that they all have a say, and what they say is going to be listened to, and they have a role, they can make a contribution and genuinely affect the blueprint, for example. Then I think that's very empowering for people, and they're much more likely to continue their participation.
I think
it's kind of the antidote to the other way of doing it, the traditional way of doing it, which is someone in a corridor of power decides what's going to happen, and then everyone gets told what's going to happen, and then you have to lump it.
This is a good question, and it links to one that's been raised by Wes Hinks in the chat, where he says, you know, that it's very simple in principle to get everyone together and agree a long-term plan, but actually it's pretty complex, and because it's so complex, it's not often being done.
No.
And one of the principles and one of the reasons that the Co-Adapt project exists is that we're sharing good practice on an international basis, and what we're doing on Connecting the Culm is perhaps probably one of the most ambitious projects in the Co-Adapt program in terms of the scale of community engagement that we want to generate in the plan. So we totally realize it's a substantial challenge, and we're going to be innovating in the way we do it. It's going to be quite new, and so we'll learn from whoever we can about
having said that. Just to add to that, I completely agree. Just to add to that, though, in terms of Wes's question, it is very complex. It is hugely challenging, but it's also hugely time-consuming and resource-intensive, and you need very specialist skills in order to be able to be a broker and genuinely bring people together through these processes. Having said that, there are a great many examples emerging out there of where people have successfully undertaken exercises like this. I can share some of those examples if people want to get in touch with me afterwards. Then I can point you in the direction of a great many examples where you see a genuine grassroots, bottom up, as we would call it, approach, where citizens and members of a community are genuinely brought together to come up with a shared plan for the future of their place. So that's why I think I have so much hope that we can be successful in Connecting the Culm. It's not automatic that we're successful, but if we work hard and we build on the other people's successes, then I think we can be successful too.
Thanks, Nick. Okay, David, you.
Sorry, there's a question. Somebody's had their hand up. Naomi Mason. Although I suspect that's not Naomi. I just wanted, because they've had their hand out for a little while, that's all.
Thank you. Yes, it's Rupert. So I'm using my partner's login. I couldn't get into my, and that actually may take care of this question, because I missed the first 10 minutes of the talk, which, can I say, was actually really, really interesting. And it was just basically about kind of targets and outcomes. Obviously seeing the development of some strategic planning for it. I don't remember seeing anywhere about there being a set of targets and outcomes for the project. And it maybe that was in the first 10 minutes when I was trying to sign on, but I'd just be interested to see how that was being developed if it's not in place at the moment.
Well, yeah, thanks, Rupert. We didn't want to sort of overwhelm people with all the technical detail.
Sure.
But yes, behind the project, there sits some substantial targets in terms of the range of engagement that we achieve, how many people we involve in the process, and in terms of how many hectares of land we feel at the end of the project have become more resilient because they are cared for and held under a long-term plan. So it's in the quality of the planning is one of the plan that emerges from this is one of the measures that we'll be using. But actually, Nick is in charge of monitoring and evaluation, so he's really on the detail of that.
I couldn't imagine for a minute it wouldn't be there, but I thought I may have missed it. And it's really good to see the word resilience running through it, be it flood resilience or biosecurity resilience or even community resilience, if that plays in with it. It's good to see that as a key thread behind the whole thing.
Yeah, so it's a key part of the project is to define what those terms mean. So what does resilience mean? What does community resilience mean? What does co-creation mean? Because co-creation is a very specific thing, and you need to do it right, and you need to be successful in order. How do we know? Only by working out exactly what we think those things mean, and then developing a way of saying, right, how will we know that we've been successful? How will we be able to demonstrate that we have genuinely co-created the blueprint? How will we be able to demonstrate that we've delivered nature-based solutions that actually work and do contribute to building resilience in a rural landscape like the Culm? So all of that is in the background, and we're working tirelessly to scratching our heads. It's another head-scratching project.
I couldn't imagine for a minute it wouldn't be, but obviously I just didn't see it in there, so I just wanted to just dig a bit on that. Thank you, that's helpful.
David next, yes.
I just wanted to mention something I mentioned to you the other day, Dominic, at Heel, which is really the bit of the river I'm familiar with from childhood. We have two large landowners on either side. One is obviously the Trust, which is ahead of the curve by what's been said today, and I think I probably knew that already. North and east of Heel and Bradnage is mostly duchy tenancies. So therefore, I think to create a dialogue with the duchy, if this hasn't already been done, would be useful because, as I say, many of the farms are duchy tenants. At Heel, there is a little pocket of freehold properties, which when I say we, this is the Heel Society, which is slightly different from the Bradnage group. We're sort of in dialogue with local farmers that have got freehold land on the Culm, and we've tree planted for the last 25 years on bits of our river and other places. But I really think the duchy, if I can say so, needs to catch up with the Trust. But I don't know what
well, we still
contact you have with the duchy or could create with the duchy.
Thanks, David. I think that's a useful lead, and we will follow up. As Nick said, we've got boots on the ground again very shortly, and we'll be able to start talking to landowners in a bit more detail about those kind of opportunities. And you're right, that bit of land between Heel and Bradnage has got a lot of potential. Very interesting area for joining up some dots.
Just to add into that very briefly, the duchy are becoming quite progressive in the way that they're approaching things in other parts of the southwest. There's some project work that's going on Dartmoor and in other places, which is showing some very, very promising signs. Obviously, the tenancy situation it makes it slightly more complex because there's a difference between the landowner and the land manager. But yeah, so I'm encouraged by the recent news from the duchy in terms of the way that they're thinking about things, in terms of their trials that they're undertaking for the new environmental land management and some of the natural flood management work that they're thinking about doing on Dartmoor, for example. So I think that's a really good point that you've made, and definitely worth following up, because I think that then we might be pushing at an open door.
Can I come in there?
Yes, thank you, Helen.
Hi, that's a really good time actually for me to raise what I wanted to say. So there's been a few conversations about cycle paths and landowners. So I live in Bradninch, and one thing that I've been really keen to try and get off the ground is a safe cycle path between Bradninch and Culmpton. It's extremely close by, and there's no way to cycle or walk or even walk safely to Culmpton at the moment. Bradninch Council and Mid Devon District Council have allegedly decided that along the Culm is the route that they want for the cycle path, and this would particularly help a lot of the students that go to secondary school in Culmpton. So I guess my question is, how do we make sure that that gets off the ground? How does that integrate with this project? And how do we make sure that this isn't just a vague statement that's actually kicking the can down the road, that's going to be derailed by, for example, the landowners? Because I think it's a really crucial part of the connectivity in this area, and my point I made earlier on the chat about making the Culm accessible in this area.
Yeah, that's that is totally the purpose of the blueprint, is to create a long-term plan that people are committed to delivering. And because it's being generated by a really broad swathe of society, that there's a kind of moral obligation and a moral weight on decision makers and funders to deliver on.
I'd suggest that it should be more than a long-term aspiration. I mean, the climate crisis is now. We've already got people driving to Culmpton all the time. You know, I appreciate that we need to take a whole Culm view of this, and the idea of having a walking route that goes the entire length of the Culm, I think, is fantastic, and would love to see that, and I'd love to see that also be for cycling. But I want to make sure that these really important, really urgent initiatives now aren't subject to people saying, oh, we need to wait for example, the long-term Connecting the Culm project to complete before we can make any traction on this.
That's certainly, yeah, no, again, personally, I completely agree with you in terms of the urgency of the climate emergency, and in terms of the urgency for such things as these connections to be made in terms of the cycle path that you've described. We're not waiting for the Connecting the Culm blueprint. We're already looking at delivering over the next few months some of the initial works in terms of nature-based solutions, and so I think all we can offer is we would want to talk to you in more detail about that particular proposal, and we can try and find out what the best way of the project being involved in that conversation, or offering support, or in any way that we can, without knowing the exact details. It's hard to say. I mean, I don't think it's something that we would just kick down the road and say, oh, well, we'll put that in the blueprint, because it would be too late by then. So I think this is very much part of the process for Connecting the Culm, is that we want to be involved and adding value in any way we can in the catchment, in any place that we can, that serves the needs and wants of the local people. And now, you know, now is the time. We're already we're underway, and we're up and running, and we want to be involved now. So I can't really say anything other than that.
That's great, thank you.
Thanks, Nick. I think we have a question from Natasha, and then we'll come to Chris.
Thank you. I've got a personal and a professional comment and question. The personal question is, do you plan to visit primary schools? Because I'd be really happy to help you talk into Colmstock Primary School, which covers quite a bit of the upper catchment. They did some really good work recently on the back of Blue Planet on marine pollution. So I think they'd be really, really interested to help with Connect the Culm. And on a professional side, I work in coastal governance with coastal partnerships, which is very similar to catchment partnerships. And I've heard about, in response to the comments about the Duchy and Dartmoor, I'm aware of something called the Dart Charter. And I think that might be a really nice thing to aim towards as part of the blueprint. It was a way of bringing farmers, landowners together for the longer term, but you know, in the short term, having a real focal point. It may be something you're familiar with, but if you're not, have a look at the Dart Charter, because I think it's a nice kind of way of getting people together and focusing forwards for the short, medium and long term.
I'll answer your first question, Natasha, and I'll hand over to Nick on the second. So part of the project has got an educational element, and we have someone lined up to start working in schools. Obviously, it got derailed by COVID, and but that work is all on the blocks. I think that she has got good links with Culmstock. I think she's done a lot of work with Culmstock Primary before, but if not, then I'll certainly put her in touch with you.
Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, so I think it's a perfect example of connecting the Culm in terms of connecting human beings together. We talk a lot about the river, we talk a lot about the environment, but probably the most important role we can play is actually bringing people together and connecting. If people like Natasha, who's interested in the schools side of things, and Kat, who's delivering the schools program. So, so I was actually part of the team that delivered the DART charter at Dartington. So
Okay, great.
quite familiar with it. When we first became involved in Connecting the Culm, we had long, in-depth sort of navel-gazing discussions about what is a blueprint and what is it a blueprint, and what is a do we call it a blueprint? And one of the contributions I made was, is it kind of like a charter? And I think they're basically the same idea, just slightly delivered in a slightly different way and with a slightly different name. But basically the core sort of spirit of the charter and for the river and the blueprint for the Culm are basically the same.
I think what I'd add to that, though, is that I think the idea of the blueprint has got those values and that kind of vision and those principles embedded in it, but it's also intended to be a intensely practical document about land. It's a land use planning document. Yeah. So it will actually, it's meant to translate into very concrete action on the ground, and not float as a sort of set of principles solely. Yeah, the charter became more of a sort of a code of conduct almost, or a declaration that the community signed up to set a benchmark for what they wanted their river to be like, in that case at the DART at the bottom. And it didn't really have an action plan. It kind of did, but the action plan wasn't the important part of it, whereas Dominic's absolutely right that the blueprint is not just a shared vision for the future, but it's also going to be hopefully set in the policy, and have a very concrete set of actions, which, you know, a roadmap, if you like, that says if in order to get the resilient catchment that we want and need in the future, then we need to do these things on this time frame, otherwise we won't be successful. So it's hopefully a bit more punchy. Thanks, Nick. Chris had his hand up there next.
Yes, thank you. In terms of the sort of urgent actions and best practice that needs to take place now, here in our Acland parish, we've been a little bit concerned with what we think is indiscriminate cutting of verges, because and in fact we've had to fight once or twice to actually stop our verges being cut, so that we can develop more of the wildflowers. And we've noticed, you know, that even weed killer and pesticides are being used around the village. Well, is it part of your remit to recommend to parish councils best practice to prevent this happening?
I'd say that our priority is about flooding and drought, the most direct impacts of climate change. And we can't tackle every single issue that's out there to do with nature and the environment, or we'll spread ourselves so thin that we cease to have the impact we need to have. But we're also want to be very receptive to what local communities feel is important and reflect that in the plan. And it could be that there are aspects that we can bring influence through the plan on those sorts of decisions. Yeah, I agree. I agree. Ultimately, if that's it's not just it is about climate change. It's about the river. It's about the water environment. But you know, it's about ecological disaster as well, and biodiversity collapse. And there's all these other things. And ultimately, it does. If we're genuinely saying to people, we want you to participate and feed your ideas and your wants and needs into the blueprint, then we want to capture all of those issues.
I think the thing that caught my ear was the reference to, I think you said indiscriminate use of pesticides. Well, if I've seen pesticides being applied in around where I live, and there's no doubt whatsoever that those are significant proportion of that pesticide is ending up in the water environment. So there is a connection there, and so that, okay, I think we have to think about some of the really big issues, and I hate to say it, but in terms of flooding and drought, but I think we need to capture as many of these other additional issues as we can as well, because obviously that it's about making the place that you live in nicer and better and more resilient in general, but obviously with a focus on the river. So
thank you, Nick. I'll come to you in a minute, Jeffrey. I think because Adam just had a question first on the chat, which was whether we've got plans to set up working groups, especially around if there's access is such a big issue. So on the general point, yes, as once from the forum in November, we fully expect there to be themed working groups emerge that bring together people who've got common interests, and they can work in detail. Clearly, with such a big, complex project, it's going to need breaking down into constituent parts. And we can imagine some being geographical working groups that might cover an area like the Upper Culm or the Mid Culm or the Lower Culm. And some might be thematic groups that look at things like access or water quality or nature-based solutions. And it's very interesting that so much of the feedback, not just on today's session, but also through comments we're getting on the website and other input, has been about access to the river. So it's obviously going to be quite a strong theme going forward, even though it's not directly to do with flooding and drought, but it matters to people. So it's a bit like what Nick was saying. If something emerges as a really important issue for the whole community, then we need to reflect that.
So a piece of research was done not long ago that said that if people live within 2 kilometers walk of a river, then they're much more likely to care for it and value it and want to look after it. And then we did an analysis to look at the West Country and to see how many people met that criteria. And guess what? 100% of people in the West Country live within 2 kilometers of a river. And then we thought, well, that's weird, because why do so few people seem to be aware of their local river, or to value their local river, or to be inspired to look after their local river? And what it comes down to is that actually you need to nuance the research finding, which is that if you live within 2 kilometers of somewhere where you can access the river, then you're more likely to, and connect with it, then you're more likely to want to look after it and to care for it and value it. So the Culm actually has, in its entirety, has huge levels of access to the river. The footpaths around Acland by the river and in the central section of the catchment are astonishing. There are other rivers in the West Country, like the Tamar, for example, which has almost no access. The X Trail, which is the footpath, the long distance footpath that follows the course of the X, almost at no point south of Exmoor can you actually see the river. So so access to rivers is a major issue, and if at the core of this concept is if people can connect with their local river, if they can see it, if they can, their health and well-being is improved. We know if spending time looking at water, spending time next to water, so if we can unlock those connections, if we can make those connections really positive so that people have really positive experiences when they connect with their local river, then we can create this sense of wanting to value and nurture and look after a local river amongst local people. So it's absolutely core, this idea of reconnection. So in other parts of the Culm, particularly further down, access is a lot harder to come by, and that's why people place such huge value in having access, footpath or cycling access alongside the river. So it's absolutely the core of this is about finding opportunities for people to genuinely connect with the river. Hopefully complete submersion is the best way. But if not, then at least standing on the bank or sitting on a bench or taking a water sample.
Thanks, Nick. Jeffrey, you had your hand up.
Yeah, Jeffrey Bass. I'm a councillor in Culmstock, and I have a question about flooding in two parts, if I may. Firstly, the flooding rate seems to have reduced from the headwaters in the last 5 years. Is it action that the Environment Agency already taken? I think we need to know where we're starting from in terms of understanding what happens next. Secondly, do you keep records of rainfall and the river level at Culmstock and Heel and compare the two in a way that's easy to understand?
Yeah.
I think that's one for you, Nick.
Yeah, so obviously the flow is monitored by the Environment Agency lower down the Culm. One of the other strands, which we haven't really mentioned actually today very much, is that there's a whole strand of Connecting the Culm, which is monitoring water quality and flow at various places around the catchment. So we're going, and that hasn't started yet. It should have started a few months ago, but it hasn't yet, but it will. So there will be some monitoring, and that data will be fed through to people, so you can see for yourselves how the river responds under certain circumstances, and that will include also the capturing of rainfall levels. Obviously, anyone can monitor rainfall, and there is obviously data available as well from the Met Office and other places where we can actually look at rainfall that's fallen in the past. So yeah, so I hope that kind of answers your question. In terms of so there is plans to do a lot more monitoring, essentially, and particularly we're going to be monitoring the nature-based solutions that we deliver to make sure that they work, that they're effective, and to try and detect the effect they have on the flows in the river. Although obviously that's quite challenging. In terms of your perception that the flooding has gone down at the top of the catchment, I don't know the answer to that. I mean, if you've observed that, then it's probably the case. But obviously we've had a bit of funny weather, that we've had global weirding in the last few years. We had 2018 where not a drop of rain fell for months on end, and 2019 looked like it was going to go the same way. And there was a huge increase in anxiety about drought, obviously, over the last 2 years. This year, apart from what's going on with humanity and coronavirus, environmentally, it's also been very strange. We had the wettest February ever, followed by the driest April ever. So yeah, unpicking all of that is at the core of the challenge of this project. So watch this space. Hopefully we can stay connected with you, and we can, if we can capture your questions in more detail, and maybe we can look at the data that we have, or indeed collect some additional data that hopefully we can answer your questions more specifically than that rambling diatribe that I've just offered.
I think you've answered that you don't think the Environment Agency already taken flood precautions in the headwaters.
So some actions have been taken. The Environment Agency are increasing the amount of working with natural processes kind of stuff that they do. Obviously their main job is the hard engineering solutions lower down. The Exeter scheme is just concluding, so they've invested in that. But in terms of other activities in the wider landscape, there is stuff going on, but it tends to be a bit more piecemeal. Blackdown Hills AONB have also done some trials in other parts of Devon, East Devon particularly. So there's stuff going on, but it's more experimental than for real trying to protect people at the moment. Connecting the Culm obviously is the next stage in that journey, which is we try and deliver really substantial interventions that show that not only does this idea work, nature-based solutions, in small scale, but actually collectively, if you deliver enough of this kind of intervention, then you can actually achieve measurable changes in the flow regime of the river itself lower down. But that's hopefully where we're headed. But I can't tell you that. I don't know exactly how much has been delivered, but I wouldn't imagine it was a huge amount. That would have affected your perception that the flooding had been mitigated in the catchment already. We can take that question away, and we can do some digging around and see exactly what the true situation is.
I think what it shows is how dry the soil has become after your 2 dry years, and how much it's absorbed, most likely, but I wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, so the Environment Agency's soil expert, we're very lucky in East Devon to have Richard Smith, who's one of the country's, if not the leading soil scientists anywhere. he's done a huge amount of soil condition assessments in East Devon particularly, and in the Culm and the Otter, the main two rivers there. And he believes that around 60%, I think it is, of soils in the Culm and East Devon more widely are degraded in their structure. So that is, they are not functioning at optimal health. So they are not holding water when it's not raining, and they are not absorbing water when it is raining. And therefore they are not providing, the soils are not providing the protection to drought and flood that they could, if they were healthy, provide. So that's why I had that slide in the presentation about soils. Soil health is absolutely critical to building resilience in terms of drought, flood, biodiversity, carbon sequestration, you name it. And so that's a really big focus for us, because soil, it's not because of it's not because of neglect in terms of land management. It's just that modern farming has a tendency to degrade soil health and function. And so working with natural processes is the perfect answer to that. You can still, a farmer can still farm, still be productive, still be profit making, but they can do so in a way that protects their soil and therefore allows that soil to help the rest of us be resilient.
We just had a question, thank you Nick, saying, is there remiring going on for the Culm? And I think the answer is yes. I mean, the mires are a very important feature of that resilient landscape. And I know that, that there has been some work done in the last couple of years on a couple of mires up in the headwaters. And it was interesting in that very dry spell this year. We looked at some graphs, the river flow monitoring graphs for the Culm and for the Exe, and the Exe plummeted really badly during that spell. The Culm dropped, but not to the danger level. It didn't go below the red line. And so to some extent, those mires are doing their work, and and obviously the Exe is also fed by mires. So there must be other factors at play, but certainly the Culm had a little bit of extra resilience in that particular event over the Exe.
Yeah, the condition of the mires on Exmoor, obviously a huge investment has gone in to try and restore the wetlands and mires on Exmoor, but it's a work in progress. The Exe is
mires, by the way, just in answer to Jenny's question, are the place where springs arise up in the higher ground, and they tend to be boggy areas where the geology means that the water that's soaked into the landscape above is emerging just above a hard strata of rock. And so you get an area of marshy ground that then feeds into a stream, or a trickle, feeds into a stream, feeds into a larger stream, feeds into the river. So they're often the originator of water, the water cycle, and they're like great big sponges.
And they're also hugely ecologically rich in terms of wildlife and biodiversity and plants and all the rest of it. So they're very, very precious habitats, parts of the ecosystem, and they need to be looked after.
Yeah. Good. Any more comments or questions?
And on the chat, Helen was asking about contact details, and I said that people could get in touch with me if they had questions. And I know that you guys have put hello at connectingtheculm.com on there. Obviously, anyone can get in touch with the project team through that, but I'm not particularly averse to having people email me with questions or inquiries. So I can share my email address as well if people do want to contact me specifically about anything. I'm always happy to respond if I can, or if not, point you in the direction of the right person, either in West Country Rivers Trust or in other organisations that can answer questions. So,
thanks, Nick. I think we'll send a wrapping up email from this session to everyone who's attended. Thank you so much for attending and for your interesting, insightful, and stimulating questions. And that was a really good discussion at the end. Yeah, we'll send that email around. It'll give you a link to the recording, which we'll put up on the website, and some follow-up leads. We'll put Nick's email address on there for sure. And you know, take part. Please do sign up for our newsletter if you haven't already. which you can do on the website, and that'll keep you in touch with all forthcoming events. And yeah, we'll stay in touch, and we'll be approaching you probably for more opportunities to get involved in the future. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Really, really great to meet you all. Hopefully look forward to meeting you again in the future.
Bye-bye. Okay, cheerio.
Thank you.
Bye, thank you.